This video will discuss how to cite journal articles using Chicago referencing style. Another common source that you will often cite includes scholarly articles from academic journals. Just as a reminder, or an introduction if you're not already familiar, journals will typically publish one volume every single year, though sometimes it might include two. Within that volume, that journal will often have several issues, and each issue will have several different articles written by a number of different people that focus on a particular subject. It's good to have a sense of how journals are organized, so that way you can better figure out how to cite that journal article. So we're going to go through this citation to give you an example of the basic information you need to include for a journal article citation. I'll highlight each section as we go along. So first we have the article author, Kobena Mercer in this case. Then similar to a book chapter citation, in quote marks we'll have the article title, so The Longest Journey, Black Diaspora Artists in Britain. Notice that unlike the book chapters, you do not include in after the article title. In is only used for book chapters. Instead, you will go right to the journal title, though that will be in italics, in this case, art history. And you go right to the volume number, in this case 44. Note that you do not need a comma in between the journal title or the volume number. Then you will go to the issue number, which will be preceded by an abbreviation for number, NO full stop, and then the numeral. And in round brackets, you will include the publication date. Now, depending on the journal, oftentimes just the year will suffice. Sometimes you will need to include a season, so spring 2010 or summer 2020, or you may need to include a month and a year, so May 2021, for instance. Check how the journal displays the date and follow their lead. And then you will include the specific page that you cited. It's not necessary to include the full page range in the footnote unless it's a very short article and you're citing the entire thing. Leave that for the bibliography and just use specific pages for the footnote. And finally, you will need to make sure that your readers can actually access the article by including the URL, DOI, or Digital Object Identifier, or database. For most scholarly journals, DOI is recommended if one is available because it's a fairly permanent record that's unlikely to change compared to a URL. You can often find a DOI on the journal websites, but if you can't find a DOI, then a URL is usually fine. Alternatively, as with ebooks, if you have a suspicion that your source will only be accessed by people at Brooks, then you can just include the database where you accessed this particular journal article. You can always check your assignment briefs if you are unsure. Now that's the basic foundation for journal articles, but there are going to be a few variations to keep in mind. For instance, if your journal article lists more than one issue, then you'll need to check the journal to see how it will be formatted. So you can see in this first example, right at the top, that the number 3 and 4 is just one issue combined. Sometimes a journal publishes it this way, and you'll want to go by whatever the journal says. And so this is how you'll actually write out your citation, which you can see right here is NO full stop, indicating it's just a single number. If for any reason there are plural issues, you will put it as NOS full stop. But then otherwise you would cite like you would a general journal article. If you can see in the second example, there's no issue number, just the volume number. So you will just list the volume number, no issue number is needed. You can also do the reverse, so if it's the volume number that's missing, you can just include the issue number. Note that if that were to happen, you need to put a comma after the journal title, then issue number, and then go from there. Now, if you can't find any volume or issue number listed, then you need to treat it like a magazine, and we will go over magazines in a separate video. That's a little tip if you're not quite sure whether your source is from a journal or a magazine. Generally speaking, if you can't find any volume or issue number and there's just a date, chances are good it's going to be a magazine rather than a scholarly journal. There are also some slight variations for more than one author, and they're very similar to what we were discussing in books or book chapters. If there are 2 or 3 authors, then you will just list them all in the notes, usually in the order that they appear on the publication. But if there are 4 or more authors, then in the footnote, you'll just list the first author and then et al. It might be possible to find an article that has not been published yet. Do be cautious with those, as there may be changes in the article from the time you read it to when your assignment is marked. However, if you found an article that is perfect for your research, but it hasn't gone through the entire review process, there are a few things you can do depending on what stage it's in. So let's say I found out there's an article written by John Smith and it's been submitted to a journal, but it's not been peer-reviewed yet. That you will want to include the article author, the article title, the words preprint, and then the date that it was submitted, and then the URL. Might not be very common for you to encounter something like that, but if you do, then that's what you would do. Alternatively, if you found an article that has been accepted by a journal, but it hasn't appeared yet, then you will put forthcoming where the publication information would be. So let's say Jane Doe has submitted an article to the History Journal, Past and Present, that's forthcoming in their 258th volume. It's a little ways away at the time of this recording, but let's pretend for the sake of examples that that's what's happened. You will include the article author, the article title, then the journal title, the volume number that is going to appear, and then in round brackets, you include forthcoming. What will be a little bit more common is if you found an article that's been published online, but before the official publication date. You might encounter that a little bit more often. In this case, you will include a lot of the similar information as we have before. So the article authors, in quote marks, you put the article title, the name of the journal, and then you will put the words published ahead of print, and then you will put the online publication date after that, and then you'll put either the URL, DOI, whatever is easiest for readers to actually access the article. Again, this may not be super common, but if you do encounter these types of articles, then that's an overview of what you would do. Now, you'll notice throughout this discussion, I did not talk about access dates. And for some sources, such as web pages, you will need an access date. But in Chicago, they don't find much use for access dates for journal articles because in most cases, it's quite difficult to find earlier versions of a journal article. And so in most cases, access dates don't have a whole lot of purpose. So only include an access date for a journal article if there is no publication date or if it's required for your assignment. However, if you need to include an access date, then you will put it right after the page numbers, but before the URL or DOI. So you can see in this example, you will indicate right there that it was accessed on the date that you viewed it. To learn more about Chicago referencing, watch the other videos in this series, or visit the relevant course resource help page for your subject.